The pictures were gruesome. Faces with multiple large puncture wounds on one side, and blood leaking out of their ear. For others, the victims that hadn't gotten away alive, it was brutal, ripping wounds on their neck. The survivors who were still somewhat coherent said that it had been the most terrifying experience of their lives. Somehow, the wide, staring eyes and screaming mouths of the dead, frozen forever in the last moment of terror, said the very same. What they all had in common was that the fact they were all attacked while hiking in or near a forest in the Italian province of Caserta, just north of Naples, on the edge of the Campanian plain. This put it squarely in the jurisdiction of the Italian branch of the SCP Foundation, one of the oldest and most storied international divisions of the world's greatest anomalous containment organization. At first, they assumed what they were looking at here were textbook vampire attacks, and Site Vittoria, the nearest Foundation containment site to Caserta, dispatched Pugnus Ferri. This elite team is one of the Italian branch's greatest squadre speciali mobili, the special mobile squads. They're trained specifically to deal with extremely hostile anomalies and groups of interest. But as the group, led by Captain Alessandro Draghi, crept into the forest with light tactical guard, sidearms, and assault rifles, they had no idea that they were wandering into a trap. How could they have known that the thing they were dealing with was so much more terrifying than any mere vampire? Then again, the wise always tend to say that the best way to learn is through experience, if you survive anyway. Of course, the way to learn about all kinds of interesting and terrifying anomalies without risking life and limb in the process is to subscribe to SCP Explained right here on YouTube. We've got the best and largest collection of animated videos exploring the SCP Foundation catalog that you can find anywhere. And if you want to keep the good times rolling, don't forget to hit the notification button so you never miss another one of our uploads. As the squad crept forwards through the dark, things weren't looking so good. For a group so well trained and with so much experience in encountering terrifying creatures, the fact that a thick sense of dread had settled over them all wasn't an encouraging sign. They couldn't even really conceive of why, but the members of Pugnus Ferry all felt a profound sensation of being watched by something far more powerful than any of them had ever encountered. Something that, if it wanted to, could kill any of them with a flick of its wrist. Though it didn't want that, did it? It wanted to take things slow, make them panic. It was Agent Sergio Zaya that began to experience direct phenomena at first. He heard a thin, almost whispering voice calling his name from a copse of nearby trees, a voice that chilled his blood with recognition. Could it possibly be? Oh yes. He looked and saw her standing there, Carmela Lupertazzi, his old teammate. She still had the blood on her tactical gear. Her face was pale and mournful. "Why, Sergio?" she said, reaching up to her face. "Why did you let me die?" To Sergio's horror, she began peeling away her face, revealing a grimacing skull with hateful eyes underneath. And behind this awful vision, he saw a huge, dark figure, its shrouded face set apart only by 2 points of white, glowing light. It looked at him over Carmela's shoulder. Even without seeing its face, Sergio could feel its hunger. He screamed and leveled his rifle, peppering the trees with a sudden burst of gunfire. The rest of the team jumped at the sudden outburst, some turning and concentrating fire on the same area out of habit. But when the smoke cleared, there was nothing there, and all eyes were on Sergio to give them some kind of answer. "I don't know," he said, eyes down out of shame. I just thought I saw something. I'm sorry." And he wouldn't be the last either. As they continued through the trees, Agent Elena Mattei had heard a skittering, chittering sound that made her skin want to take off her body like a kite. Where was it coming from? She wondered, until she saw moonlight shadows cast down from the canopy above her head. Of course. She looked up, expecting to see branches and leaves, and instead her hands tightened around the grip and forestock of her assault rifle, slick with immediate frightened sweat. Her worst nightmare. The branches up above were entirely wrapped in glistening white webs, where huge spiders with 10-inch long legs darted and skittered in unpredictable configurations. Spiders, her stalling mind gave her. Why the hell did it have to be spiders? Smaller spiders, which were still about the size of a clenched human fist, began descending towards her on silken threads. They were getting closer and closer to her and the rest of the team. Up in the trees, past the mesh of dense webbing and the hundreds, if not thousands, of crawling spiders, was the monster. A long black figure with glowing white eyes shining through the dark like terrible stars against the canvas of the night sky. Just like Sergio before her, Elena screamed and let rip into the sky. She soon found the barrel of her rifle being forcibly lowered by Captain Draghi, who glared at her furiously. She looked up and saw, just like the apparition of Carmela that Sergio had seen before, the webbing and all the spiders it called home were gone. Just stark branches and the moon glaring down at them through the spaces in between. But Captain Draghi didn't have time to scold either Elena or Sergio for their erratic behavior. Another agent, Giacomo Russo, suddenly sharply inhaled and grabbed at his chest, falling to his knees. The team medic, Agent Maria Orlandi, immediately began attending to him while Lieutenant Vittorio Mattini called in reinforcements. It seemed that Giacomo was having a heart attack, right here in the middle of the forest. They waited here for reinforcements and medevac, pointing their weapons in all directions to prevent any kind of surprise attack from the creature. Captain Draghi had been in this game long enough to understand its thinking intuitively. Split the group, use fear as a weapon, pick off the stragglers for easy prey. Clearly, this thing was intelligent, but he comforted himself in assuming that it must also be weak. If it had physical strength and durability on its side, then why would it resort to ambush tactics and not assault the team head-on? Perhaps the ball was still in their court. The team, with increased numbers from backup, pushed forward as Giacomo was taken back to the site. There was a breakthrough when Captain Draghi, who had tested as having an exceptionally high psychic resistance scale, noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. But he didn't see an illusion. He saw what was really there. A tall, dark humanoid with glowing white eyes staring surreptitiously between the trees. And what's more, it didn't seem to notice that he'd noticed it. Perfect. Doing everything he could to avoid telegraphing his movements, Draghi chambered a tracking round, lifted his rifle, and fired a perfect shot at the creature's center mass. It would have no way of escaping them now, even when it gave a defensive shriek and blasted off into the surrounding dark. There would be no way of escaping them now, as a satellite far above traced its exact GPS coordinates as it moved through the forest and loaded them onto the team's HUD. It moved fast, but humans have always been endurance hunters. Knowing its location allowed Draghi to coordinate the larger team and have them come in through multiple sides, boxing the monster and surrounding it. Superior numerical force would win the day here. However, when the monster was actually surrounded, the dynamic changed entirely. And soon Draghi realized what an incredibly foolish assumption he'd made earlier. When left with no option for escape, the creature darted from operator to operator, slashing them with its long, vicious claws or easily chewing through their armor with its 16 serrated teeth. Before anyone could even really figure out what was going on, 10 people were already dead, their eviscerated bodies thrown like ragdolls into the trunks of trees. Scores more were badly injured before the monster was actually subdued and taken to Site Vittoria in a high-security convoy, where it was taken in for testing and designated SCP-015-IT, also known as The Boogeyman. Why, you ask? Well, it isn't just the monster's ghoulish appearance, with its jet-black skin and absorbing 98% of light that touches it, or even its cognitohazardous ability to producing terrifying hallucinations or even cause cardiac arrest through ambient exposure. It's mainly the fact that this monster literally feeds on fear. It latches onto the side of a victim's head with its teeth before sliding its long, forked tongue into their ear or throat, where it siphons adrenaline and noradrenaline, the chemical byproducts of fear and stress, directly out of the brain to sustain itself. And clearly, the fear diet works wonders. Not only is the Boogeyman highly resilient to damage, shockingly strong for its reduced muscle mass, and incredibly fast, it also has a considerable healing factor that made it a nightmare for the Foundation operators attempting to contain it inside the forest. But now, thankfully, it is contained in Site Vittoria, where it feeds on a diet of fear from the brains of pigs released into its containment chamber twice a day. Perhaps you think you understand everything there is to know about SCP-015-IT. Maybe you believe that the Boogeyman is yet another one of the Foundation's classic Euclid-class murder monsters, locked away after a rampage. If that is what you think, your belief would have been in line with the Foundation, until they started digging a little deeper beneath the surface. One of the undercover agents who'd been canvassing the surrounding area where the Boogeyman attacks were most kinetic found a stronghold for a little-known group of interest, the Confraternity of St. George's Knights. The Confraternity as an organization is actually significantly older than most tellings of the Foundation's own origins, having been sanctioned by Pope Leo I in the year 453 as an organized group to investigate, police, capture, and in some cases, actively destroy the anomalous. Even their name is taken from the English patron saint, St. George, who was said in legends to have slayed a dragon, and in almost 2 millennia since their founding, they'd gone on to keep slaying what you might metaphorically call dragons, supernatural entities that they believed to be minions of the Dark Lord, Satan. In the early 2010s, it was agents of the Confraternity that first discovered the Boogeyman, cornering it in the dark of the forest after citizens of nearby towns had gone missing and turned back up with mysterious wounds to their heads and necks. They sent these modern-day knights into the woods to corner it. While it displayed a far greater resistance to holy weapons than they'd ever imagined, they managed to overpower it with pure martial skill and contain it in a nearby castle under their control. There they renamed it Dia 212 and labeled it a shadow demon, a clear threat to all that is good and innocent in God's kingdom. One member of the Confraternity, however, didn't believe this was quite so simple a call. This was Father Liardi, an old Florentine cardinal who'd become a member of the Confraternity after performing a successful exorcism in the 1970s. While many saw cruelty and horror in the creature, Liardi saw pain and fear, a kind of deep hurting that made it lash out. What was the truth behind the shadowy facade? As time went on, the fascination of Father Liardi, a patient and understanding man if there ever was one, only grew. He made a note on the entity's progress, reading, "I am increasingly fascinated by the creature we have captured, despite its mere sight being repugnant beyond every limit. I'm starting to believe that its soul is gentle. I noticed that its screams are similar to a pained cry, and that they get subside when I speak to it with a comforting tone. I think it was originally a human soul before the enemy transformed it into the monster it is now. I must find a way to communicate with it. It is my duty to bring back to the Lord every lost soul." It would be easy for the generally more secular minds of the SCP Foundation, Italian or otherwise, to look at this and scoff at the naivete of a man thinking he could redeem a violent anomaly that literally feeds on fear. But Father Liardi's doctrine of forgiveness and restorative justice actually seemed to bear fruit over time, as his attempts to approach it with kindness seemed to actually lead to a genuine rapport developing over time. 2 months of progress after capture, he made yet another promising update. "I can affirm with certainty that Dia 212 is not completely evil. It showed great curiosity towards everything that was showed to it, and does not harbor hatred or fear for holy objects. Initially, it was very distrustful and always drew back whenever I approached it. But not only did it never attack me, it also grew fond of me and my disciples. However, it pains me to admit that it remains fearful towards all those who wear the uniform of our holy order, perhaps because of the wounds it sustained during capture. I shall recommend to everyone to wear different clothing to not make it nervous, and to try a gentler approach with the creature." It seemed that Father Liardi's methods were foolproof on this, given that he was able to make his case within the grounding of Christian doctrine around forgiveness and redemption. His superiors were content to allow him the resources to continue pursuing his new holy mission, to prove that even a shadow demon could be wrenched from the grasp of the devil and made good again in the redeeming light of the Lord's forgiveness. And sadly, it wasn't the Boogeyman or any kind of demonic creature that shattered Father Liardi's beautiful dream. It was other human beings with the most monstrous intent. The Boogeyman became an anomaly unexpectedly intertwined with politics, intrigue, and war in the world of anomalous Italy. It's vital for you to understand that Italy, as a landmass with profound history, both anomalous and otherwise, has a network of groups of interest every bit as rich and dangerous as their English-language counterpart. Prior to 1946, the most powerful of the anti-anomaly organizations on the Italian peninsula was the Royal Institute of Italian Anomalies, or RIDIA, which was founded by King Victor Emmanuel II in 1871 for the purpose of protecting the Kingdom of Italy from the anomalous. However, its goals were perverted by the greed and cruelty of one man, Benito Mussolini. When Mussolini turned Italy into his own fascist playground during the Second World War, he also commandeered RIDIA and changed it from a defensive organization to an offensive one. Their new command was to find and weaponize anomalies, both against the country's international enemies and to oppress anyone who wasn't in lockstep with the fascist party's plans internally. Soon enough, anyone in RIDIA who wasn't a die-hard Mussolini loyalist was purged through either arrest or execution, making a once great anti-anomaly group instead a fanatical paramilitary force for the Mussolini regime. RIDIA collapsed entirely when Mussolini was overthrown and killed in the closing days of the war, but its surviving members continued their mission in the dark, becoming the Consiglio Fascista dell'Occulto, Italian for Fascist Council of the Occult, or CFO for short. The CFO has spent the decades after the war using their anomalous plunder and arcane knowledge to pioneer dangerous biotechnology, giving each member of the anomalous terrorists what basically amounts to terrifying superpowers. And not unlike the chaos insurgency that plagues the English-speaking Foundation, the CFO has been known to conduct regular raids against other anomaly-containing forces in Italy in an attempt to bolster their power. And an attack like that was exactly what befell the confraternity. An 8-foot-tall, superpowered anomalous fascist punched down one of the castle walls with a single blow, and several other agents poured into the facility. One could project deadly superheated lasers from his eyes, slicing through reinforced doors and knights attempting to return fire with heavy weaponry. Another had transformed her arms into what can only be described as submachine guns made of muscle and bone, firing out hardened capsules of blood that hit with the force of 9mm rounds. In the attack, 12 members of the confraternity were killed, and a number of boxes containing important files were stolen by the terrorists, who then fled into the night. However, in the chaos of the battle, the containment unit housing the Boogeyman was also destroyed, and as any animal would, it fled from the fighting and the sounds of gunfire, going back to a familiar place where it had once hunted, the very forest where the SCP Foundation would discover and contain it only 2 months later. Does a kind heart beat beneath the Boogeyman's obsidian skin, chained down by hunting instinct and the fear of starvation that haunts us all? Maybe, maybe not. But if the attack from the CFO on the confraternity proves anything, it's that we may have trouble redeeming the Boogeyman before we can even redeem ourselves. Now check out evil SCP creatures that should never be let out of their cells, and terrifying SCPs that lurk in the dark for more.